Hey, so glad you could make it. Stuart Hudnall here. Welcome to School Story. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about the cornerstone of student success. That's right, we're talking about bridges. Not the physical ones, but those bridges of communication between educators and parents. And in the world of education, communication, like we know, can be a significant challenge. From handling confrontations with parents to navigating the evolving landscape of digital communication. What we're going to do today is we're going to explore the nuances, the strategies of connecting effectively in our schools. Join me and Spencer as we unravel the complexities and celebrate the triumphs in the journey of educational communication. Welcome back to another episode of School Story. I'm Stuart Hudnall.
I'm Spencer Campbell.
And today we're talking about building bridges. We're going to be chatting about education, and we're going to be talking about communication between educators and parents. Quite possibly the biggest obstacle, but also the biggest bridge that we get to cross and has some of the biggest buy-in or payoff. What do you think?
Reward. I think if you're a good communicator, that will outweigh a lot of other weaknesses that you may have as a leader or teacher and educator.
Yeah. And it can also be your biggest headache and downfall if you don't have that ability or you're not growing that.
Right.
Would you say that's true?
Internally and externally. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Let's kick off the episode. You're not expecting it, but let's start by give me a story. Give me a situation where you had a parent, either to teacher, parent to administrator communication, either snafu or positive situation.
Major snafu. My first year of teaching, I got an email from a parent who was pretty rude and kind of attacking me for something that she thought had happened in the classroom. It did not happen. And was over the top, and we've talked about this before, and I don't want to bring this in, but I had kind of worked outside of education in the business world. So, I mean, don't take kindness for weakness. And this is one of those moments where normally I would kind of be kind and just show grace, but I was really kind of frustrated with the whole email. She attached my principal on it. She attached our team on it. And I think worse than all of that, she did a 556 all, which is basically the whole staff.
I wonder how she knew how to do that.
Well, so it's not really a long story, but she worked at the school previously, and she was in the local congregation of our principal and in our local religious group. And so it was, anyway, and I was super frustrated, and I did not kind of typically do what I recommend everybody to do, is to either wait 12 hours or 24 hours or have somebody reread your email or whatever. And I just fired back an email in the heat of frustration. And in doing so, I replied to everybody that was attached on the original email. So I sent it to the principal, the mom, our team, and the whole school. And the principal brought me down within probably 20 minutes, right? He sent somebody up to my class, brought me down. And I love the way he handled it. He said, listen, he said, you're not wrong on what you said. He said, the tone in which you said it and who you said it to is absolutely unprofessional. I need you to send an apology, and we're going to talk about how to do this in the future. Right. And so part of that was like, hey, I understand why you're frustrated. And we talked about it later after the fact, but it was, I had teachers coming up to me afterwards and were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you. Is that how you always talk to parents? And then other teachers like, oh my gosh, I've had this parent and the oldest siblings before. I'm so glad that you finally said something, but it was pretty embarrassing because looking back, I mean, it was kind of petty and whatever, but I learned a great lesson.
How did she respond to it?
She called the principal, and the principal, who I still love to this day and work with, he's now in our district office. He basically said, I'm going to handle it. There will be consequences. This is uncalled for. And we had that whole conversation before, and then he talked with me after. And so I did send an apology to the mom and everything like that. Even though I was right in the way that I said it, it was my approach and the timing and everything. Anyway. So it was something really small, but that's it. So
did you make that mistake again?
No.
Because you said it was your first year teaching?
Yeah. I mean, I probably made the lack of communication or clarity of communication problem multiple times. I think I still do that.
Sure.
Because what's in my head doesn't necessarily come out the way I want in an email or in whatever. But it wasn't vindictive. I'm not vindictive. I'm not attacking people. I'm not doing it publicly. I'm not doing any of that. And even privately, I'm not necessarily doing that. But with the amount of communication that we have, especially now with everything that we post or share or email can be posted online. I think early on, I just learned that basically everything that you say or do can be recorded. So just assume that it is being. And so I'm very kind of thoughtful about what I do, when I do it, how I do it. So I don't know. What about you?
I had a parent come in and try to be coy about recording me as we were having a conversation. And so they turned on their recording device and kind of slid it down by the edge of their chair. And I mean, it was fine. I knew what they were doing, and it was my first year as an administrator, so I was a little bit more on edge. But you handle the situation like I would have handled just about any other situation. It was a very volatile one to begin with, so kind of handled it with kid gloves anyways. What I have found, though, that is when I've gone out of my way to communicate, only two times has that burned me as administrator. Every other time, hands down, far and away, has it been better than I've over communicated. Rarely do they complain about over communication. It's the under communication.
Right.
That has the problems. In fact, there's an interesting statistic. I was doing some research before the show, and it showed that, now this is about 10 years ago, but 59% of public school parents reported never receiving a phone call home in 2012 about their student. And this was the time I started teaching. I think there was a shift of moving away from teachers proactively reaching out to home about situations, where there has to be a lot more. And I was guilty as a teacher of prodding and pushing to ensure that I reached out versus being proactive about it.
Part of what you're talking about with calling, I think, is also cell phones and the access to phone numbers and spam calls. And I don't want to say it's a lost art, but even as a principal now, I have a lot of teachers that don't love calling. They would rather text or email. And part of the way that we do it is we do have access to Google Voice. So we do text parents from time to time. But on the flip side, parents also don't want to be on the phone call. Like, they don't love answering numbers that they don't know. And so, but I remember in my master's program doing so many kind of role playing activities, like on the phone and like in your office. And so when I finally got into those, I was like, man, this is nothing, right? I mean, you'll still have cases that come up and stuff like that. But I think the hardest part with communication is that non-recorded communication that happens in a building sometimes. Mm-hmm. Like when you're walking down the hall and you have a conversation with a teacher, and you've got 20 or 30 of those every day. By the time you get to the end of the day, you can't remember what you said, didn't say, how that was taken, how that was. And so I think, especially being, either a principal or a vice principal, sometimes you say things as your opinion and people think that, like, oh, that's what he wants me or she wants me to do. And so then all of a sudden what you say becomes like, oh, this is school policy. And like, no, that's not it at all. And so it's funny, as I've kind of grown in education, I see other people now, like the AOSs and other people. Very rarely do they ever like say something that's absolutely concrete. They always leave it kind of open-ended. And I don't mean that they're trying to be wishy-washy. They want to make sure that before they commit to something, they have the backing of the board or the budget or, whatever it is. And so I find it very interesting that there's this kind of game. And even as a principal, you have to kind of walk to make sure that you don't say something that people take as policy. And that includes parents, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know. But even in a classroom, right? I mean, teachers, I think, say some things, and you've got 30, 35 kids in a class. They all hear something absolutely different. Oh, I thought this was due Thursday. I swore you said Thursday. And other kids are like, no, Wednesday. And then the teacher's like, well, okay, how many of you heard Wednesday? And like half the class raises their hand, and you're like, man, I need to do a better job of communicating with everybody when things are due.
Well, and that's part of the reason we teach the teachers to have the students parrot back. All right, now when is this due? Steve, tell me when this is due. Or, Stuart, what are the instructions? What are the steps you have to take when I turn you loose? And that's what I found the good teachers to do, because even if there was miscommunication, as long as that student understood it and then parrots it back, everyone else hears it. And for the most part, you avoid most miscommunication errors.
Well, even the idea of a planner, right? And I know it's kind of come and gone and come and gone, but the idea of having kids write everything down. And I remember as a teacher, we would send a YouTube video home before the kids even got home from school that talked about what we did that day. And that was pretty, I mean, that was cutting edge. That was 2010, 11, 12 before, Canvas and all the different things that are out there now. But this idea of we wanted the information to go straight to the parents and skip the not the best communicating 12-year-olds, and parents loved it. And I tried doing it again when I was in 9th grade. It didn't work as well because by that time we had, different grading things and other things like that. So
one interesting study I found, it was done by Harvard and Brown University. What they found is that and this was done with a high school summer credit recovery program. So think about the population you're dealing with. Right. What they found is students whose parents received weekly messages from teachers there was a 41% reduction in students failing to earn credit when parents received weekly communication from the teacher. So a 59% increase.
And again, I mean, so I think on the flip side, being a parent, and part of it, is how many kids I have, but I get so much communication.
Yeah.
And depending on what level. So our middle school kids do pretty well. He emails just once a week. Our high school's all over.
So much.
Yeah, our high school's all over the place. And so, I mean, it goes back to the old adage, like if everything is important, nothing is important. So when I get 4 or 5 skylards a week that say, hey, important, please read. I'm like, well, I can't read, and it's like, well, yeah, I can read all of them. I'm sitting at home on TikTok or on Instagram or whatever. Yes, I can read them. But it's when that message is sent out is a hard part, right? It's like, is 4 o'clock the best time to send out a skylert? Is 6 o'clock?
My middle school sends a lot of skylerts to the point that, I mean, I'm an educator too. When they call, I just send it to voicemail. It's funny because I have a pretty, like, that's one of my things that I'm pretty like, hey, we're only going to send once a week. And it's going to be this time every week. And if the information's not in there, you'll get it the next week. And if we drop the ball, We'll take the repercussions of that. Every once in a while, you have an emergency one that you've got to send out. Something happens. There's a snow day or whatever. But that's not what I'm talking about. So talking about on the phone, communicating with parents. I mean, we're talking about school-wide communication, but also internally. And then do you think, I mean, that first year you probably called 500 parents, maybe? I couldn't even tell you numbers.
I mean, that's an average of 3 a day.
Yeah, probably not that many.
Well, because you have the days when you're going to call 10 parents.
Yeah.
I mean, in middle school, you were in high school, so the behavior is a little bit different in high school than it is in middle school. I would say on average, it was 5 to 10 calls a day. Like no jokes. And not all of those were negative because I really wanted to, hey, by the way, I saw your kid do this in the hallway and I just wanted to let you know how awesome they are. Right. Because it was that counter, like, I don't want to spend all my time, but that was usually at the end of the day. And obviously when there was behavior stuff, a fight or, vaping or whatever, it was like, hey, but pretty much every time we brought a kid down to the office, we tried to call home for good or bad.
Which you should do. I mean, that's good practice. Let me ask you about the communication triangle. This is the one that gets me, and I spend a lot of time on navigating communication. So you've got the triangle, you've got the administrator, you've got the teacher, and you've got the parent, right? So you've got this triangle with the 3 people. How is the best way to make that triangle work according to you?
Like my own opinion, like how I feel about that?
Yeah. How do you do the triangle?
I mean, obviously with the triangle, if I'm visualizing the picture that you're creating, we've looked at this before. The idea is to have all sides equal, right? Like it's like,
hopefully.
But
however, actually maybe not.
But so some people would view it that way, right? To have a healthy relationship between the parent, the administrator, and the teacher, you would want to have that even. But I don't think that's always the case. Like, I think early on in the year, the parent-student communication should be way more than administrator, parent, or, whatever in that triangle. Yeah. I do think there are times though, when myself included, when maybe teachers aren't included in conversations that maybe they should be included in, or there are times when, where does the student fall in that communication triangle? Maybe they're in the middle, right? And everybody's trying to whatever. I think as the older the student gets, the more responsibility they have should be part of that communication triangle. But
the hard thing is you get the message of the student telling the parent one thing,
right,
where it may or may not have happened that way. And so that's when I find I have to step in the most, is when there is the miscommunication between the parent and the teacher. But oftentimes it's through the student, because my first question always to teacher or parent is, have you reached out to the other person? Because I'm happy to facilitate it, but the hardest and most frustrating experiences I've had is when I'm that middleman and I'm trying to communicate between the two and it gets lost in translation because maybe I don't understand all the pieces at play. When those two have either not communicated or we've all sat down, that's when it's been the best.
Right. And I understand sometimes why, again, this isn't just on teachers or parents. I understand why sometimes parents don't want to talk to the teacher because they feel like the teacher's the problem.
Sure. Yeah,
I also understand why teachers don't necessarily want to talk to the parents because they feel that the parent is the problem. But I mean, one of the things that we've talked about when we talked about behavior is the minute that not the minute, but like right around the time that you get an administrator involved in your problem, that's where you lose control of the situation. Yeah. So when you set a kid down to the office, you no longer have control of the situation. And I understand that kids need to go down to the offices sometimes, but I also feel like that's the same if you have a parent that jumps over the top. Now, you are going to have parents that just jump straight over the teacher because they want to get the problem solved as fast as possible. You're also going to have a teacher every once in a while that oversteps their bounds and makes decisions for the school that maybe shouldn't be made by the teacher. That should be a conversation with, the assistant principal or the VP. I also have been in parts of situations where the teacher didn't feel supported by the admin. So that's why they don't get them involved. They feel like they got thrown under the bus. And maybe this was 2 years ago in a situation, but they've held on to that forever. And so I think trust has a lot to do with it. And we talked about this last episode where if you can let everybody know that we're here for the kid, for what's best for the kid, and that's the common goal. It's not you versus me. It's you, me, and the teacher versus helping the kid. Like the problem is helping the kid graduate or helping the kid.
You're not against each other.
Yeah.
I really like what your principal did in that story you shared at very first, where he backed you to the point of telling the parent, I'm going to handle the situation. It's a situation between me and the teacher. It's handled. The worst is when the administrator or the teacher, throws the other person under the bus to that individual and doesn't allow for that learning opportunity to happen. And then you don't feel trusted. You don't feel supported. And in the future, you're not going to be as willing to reach out because you don't feel like it's even worth it.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever thrown a teacher under the bus. I might not have handled the situation the way that they wanted or the way they thought it was going to happen.
But they may have felt thrown under the bus, even if you didn't intend it, right? And that's what I mean.
Well, and I mean, as a vice principal, I feel like I maybe not got thrown under the bus, but a situation didn't get handled the way I thought it should. And I felt like, I've shared these before, but I made a decision and went forward with it. And then the parent came back up to the principal and the principal said, you know what, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this. And I felt kind of like, we talked about it after the fact and I understood where he was coming from. It was, anyway. So I was pretty frustrated, but we worked through it. So talking about effective parent-teacher administration communication, you talked about the triangle. One of the things I want to bring up is you talked about regular updates. What about the art of parent-teacher conferences?
Well, and I think one thing I did want to make sure that was brought up is one of my favorite things that our superintendent has said. Email is not communication, it's information. So just because an email was sent to somebody, you can't assume that the information was communicated or that it was communicated, but that it wasn't a communication between you and that parent. And so that's where the phone call needs to happen or the in-person conversation needs to happen, because that really is what's going to make the difference, not just an email shot out because maybe they read it, maybe they didn't. You need to have that conversation person to person so there's no innuendos that are assumed or tone of voice that is assumed. That's one thing that has really stuck with me that good old Godfrey has mentioned.
Right. I mean, you can see it in action all the time.
Yeah.
People think one thing in a text and an email, but let's just get on the phone and hash it out, right?
My very favorite parent-teacher conference setup, anything that I've seen just happened this year. Happened during fall parent-teacher conference, and it was actually at a middle school. It was actually with one of our buddies that hopefully we get on the podcast one day. I went over to his parent teacher conference because he had invited, I work, like I brought up, at that technical career high school, right? For lack of a better explanation. And we have a hair design, nail tech program there. And I have some beautiful toenails right now. Can't show you.
Don't show them.
I'm not going to show you, but you're going to take my word for it. I went up and got a manicure and pedicure because I needed a model, and happy to do it. First pedicure in my life, but it was awesome. One girl was almost throwing up because she hates feet so bad, but she powered through it. It was hilarious. Not because my feet are that bad, but feet are feet. So whatever.
Right.
Anyways, our hair girls were invited by this principal to attend his parent teacher conference night. And what he did is he held it as a community night. And in lieu of having parents come just to talk to the teachers, what he did is he created like I said, a community night, but had all these outside organizations involved. And so we were there to provide free haircuts. We had our barbering students there, provide haircuts with them. We had nail tech that were there, and they were so busy, they weren't even able to do full manicures. They were just painting one fingernail or something, but it was cool because it was able to get us in front of a much larger crowd. But in addition to us, he had community leaders there. He had free clothing there. He had free shoes there. And this is a lower socioeconomic school that he's at. And so it was super beneficial, and they had free dinner. And so that brought a lot of people out. But in order to qualify, quote unquote, qualify for the free dinner, they had to basically have a punch card where they had to go and talk to so many teachers or so many organizations in order to qualify for that free dinner. And so it just encouraged them to be there. And when I was walking the halls, I took pictures and sent it. If you remember, they were packed. I've never seen a parent teacher conference like that. And so I love that he was willing to think outside the box and have it flip it on its head to instead, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I typically hear, because I haven't done middle school, at the high school is, for the most part, parent teacher conference is a waste of time. And we're lucky to get 8 to 10% of our parents there. It's 8 hours that is spent. And unless you teach math or a couple specific classes or subjects, you're not seeing a lot. And that was my experience being a business marketing teacher. I was an elective teacher. And I remember one night in 8 hours, I had less than 10 parents come in. So it's hard to feel like that's beneficial. And yes, what the district encourages is that and I'm sure everyone is, you're reaching out proactively to parents during that time. But it does feel different versus me reaching out to them actually coming in. And it's hard when most of the people coming in are the good students. They're not the ones that you need to talk to.
I've been in a couple different situations. We didn't have a community night, but we did a dinner and a concert kind of thing with our choir beforehand. And that ended up going really, really well. It was cool. It was just hot dogs and sodas and chips. And we did that. I think one of the other things, and it's kind of lost its art form, but one of the things that I did as a teacher, which the school did, is we did what was called student-led conferences, where the students would bring in a portfolio of work that they'd done and kind of show it to their parents. And there was some stuff in the portfolio that was meaningful, like they had artwork, they had a paper they'd written, they had some math stuff, and they were kind of walking through this portfolio, and they would go through goals and different things like that. I'm not totally against that. Some of the stuff was like prefabbed for that folder. And so you'd be going through your units, and then you'd have to create this one thing for the folder. I didn't love that part about it, but I did love that the students were in charge of showing, owning their grade or what they've learned and why and what they were going through and what their goals were. I really, really, really liked that, the goal setting part of the whole thing. I think honestly, and this is what we've done online in the school that I'm at, is we say, okay, any two-way communication that happens the week of parent-teacher conferences, whether it's teacher-initiated or parent-initiated, would quote unquote count. But the focal point of that discussion has to be the student. It can't just be like, hey, what's happening at the school or what's going on? Like, oh, we want to take this survey or whatever. It's like everything has to come back to the student. And typically, I ask my teachers to say, here, these are, and this isn't like the Oreo cookie. This is like, hey, these are things that I've seen that are going well. And these are the things that they need to work on. And that's it, right? So these are two things that your child needs to work on. And
not the feedback challenge, but just talking in general. Yeah.
And I think parents appreciate that. I think obviously with technology, parent teacher conferences have gotten a lot easier where you can do Zooms, you can meet with parents. I mean, I know IEPs and some of those other things have.
For sure.
One of the things I think that's important though, as a principal, this is super important is, or a VP, right? It doesn't matter. Your administrator in the building is you have to spend time in your PLC time with your teachers or your new teacher orientation or your mentor teachers or whatever. You have to walk through with your new teachers what parent teacher conference could look like, should look like, and doesn't look like. No matter what your setup is, if it's just an open gym where they can come in, if it's in their classroom, if it's on Zoom, whatever, is as a leader, to be effective, you have to prepare them for that, especially that first one. And what do they do if they get in a confrontational situation? When are their breaks? When is the lunch? How many kids should they be going through? What if they have a long line? What if they have a paper, all sorts of things. And one of the biggest things I think, is having a new teacher. They want to solve all the problems right then because the parent's right there. Is just to say, you know what? This sounds like this is going to be a longer conversation. Let us set up a time for next Tuesday at 3:00 or next, Wednesday at 4:00 where we can talk about this. I've got 3 or 4 other parents that I need to see right now and check in with, but I want to make sure. I feel like if you're not doing that as an administrator, you're failing your new teachers and training them what they could or should be doing, I guess. I don't know.
Well, and
should is probably the wrong word, but
I know at my former high school, there was a really strong mentor program set up. And so those specific things were the responsibility of the mentor to go over that type of information with the new teachers to ensure that they were successful. And because, for example, my last year at one of my high schools, we hired 26 new teachers. There's just no way for an administrator, even a team of 5 of us, to get to all of them effectively.
Right. Right.
And so that's why we just relied really heavily on the mentors to step in and be that person for the teacher. And sometimes it didn't end up being the mentor, but their friend that they made in the department, which is fine too, as long as they were getting the information and it was correct information and it was the positive information. But they had monthly meetings, and specifically, I know parent-teacher conferences were handled, of the month or right before they were going to happen, to ensure all those questions were answered. And so that was a really positive thing that happened with it.
Right. I mean, in reality, that could be an entire podcast episode, is like how to manage, handle, walk through, schedule, plan out a parent-teacher conference. I mean, we're not going to do it, but I mean, it could be. So walking through, and I don't know if we've done a book study on this or not, but how do you handle difficult conversations? So I want you to provide specific tips or techniques for navigating challenging discussions, whether it's about student academic struggles, behavioral issues in the classroom, or sensitive family matters.
So my number one thing, I previously worked at a high school that is infamous. I don't know if infamous is the right word, for having very engaged and passionate parents. And they really had some phenomenal parents, some of my favorite parents I've ever dealt with. In fact, we're friends with some parents that I met through there. I happen to live in the community, so I mean, that does make a difference. But one thing I found, because I can't tell you how many times I had a parent come in and they were upset, they were on fire, and it is your, I don't want to say stereotypical, but when you think of that mama bear, there's a reason they use bear in that, because that mama bear, you don't get between a bear and her cub. Like, you just don't do that. Well, I have been metaphorically between that mama bear and her cub many times, because she's coming in and she sees me as the enemy standing between her and what her sweet, perfect child, and not just always a she, it could be a papa bear. They're both, right? But when that hot parent comes in, my number one tip that I teach all new administrators, even parents or teachers, you always want to validate their passion. Because when it comes down to it, that mama bear coming in so hot, what she's showing, whether it's correct or not, is she is showing passion for her child. And if you can acknowledge that when they come in, and by talking about it, it actually almost always brings it down so many levels. If you can just look at them and say, wow, I'm so grateful that you came in to fight for your son, because ultimately it's your responsibility as the mom, and no one else is going to fight like you're going to fight for your son. So I'm so happy that you came in and that you're willing to do anything for little Stewie. Thank you. I hope you recognize I can't always do what is requested of me, but let's figure out what we can do to help him be successful, or to mitigate the situation, or whatever they're coming in for. But I found that if I can recognize and I can call out their anger, but classify it as like passion or drive or whatever you want to call it, pull out a thesaurus, pull out some synonym, it brings it down a lot. So that's my number one go-to thing that almost always helps almost every time. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. So along with that, I would say, and this is in addition, not like that wasn't awesome. One of the things along those same lines, that's not one of the things along the same lines. I got you. You're good.
It's all good.
I appreciate that you guys have a good enough relationship that you've talked about this, because a lot of times kids don't talk to their parents, and for them to tell you, that means it's important enough to them that they've decided to tell their parents to come in and talk to me about it. And again, like, I might not be able to solve this problem today, but I appreciate that you guys have an open line of communication, because a lot of students and parents don't have that. And students just get like kind of thrown under the bus, or parents don't give a flying whatever about what's going on at school with their kid. And I don't mean like flying whatever, but I'm just saying, I'm glad that you have a good enough relationship that you're coming in to talk to me about it.
Yeah.
So behavioral issues, I think, is a whole other thing. I think for teachers, sometimes, even for me as an administrator, sometimes I forget what it's like to be a kid. And so some of the decisions that they make, adults want a pound of flesh for something that does not deserve a pound of flesh. And even if it maybe does, I think that's the wrong attitude, is that, I want vengeance based on this thing that happened.
Vengeance will be mine.
Yeah. I don't know.
I have a certain set of skills.
I don't know. I don't know if I like, but I mean, always handle things with sensitivity, right? I mean, I think that's just working in public education. This comes up all the time, is you're working with kids, families, jobs, transportation, food, income, medical, psychological, doctors, lack of all those things. I mean, it's just, it's a weird thing if you were to try and break it down and explain to somebody outside. And they think, and I don't mean they don't know what's happening, but just the kind of stuff that happens in a school that we are trying to help navigate families and parents and kids through is just, sometimes it's absolutely heartbreaking, right? And I was getting a little emotional as you were talking about that. So something happened this past week that anyway.
Yes, secondary trauma. It's a real thing. You go through the traumatic event through them, and it affects you. It makes it tough. And in fact, I love talking to new administrators, because they are shocked at what they didn't know that we do as administrators, and how much we do that isn't seen.
You just said do.
I know I said do. Maybe I said do on purpose. But, all the things that go on behind the scenes that they don't know about and shouldn't know about, right? They don't need to know as teachers about it, because that's our job to make sure the school's running efficiently. And so that's always a highlight of mine, is to talk to them about what they didn't realize that we did do, not do.
And one thing I do feel like as an administrator, though, if you can tell a teacher, I think that's a question that I always ask the parents, like, hey, are you okay if I share this with the teacher? Like, you don't want to leave teachers in the dark.
It's not intentional. Absolutely not.
No, I know. But the idea of it is, I think sometimes you can tell the teacher and say, hey, listen, this is what happened. The kid's out of, the building for whatever. I'm not going to go into details, but he got suspended for an altercation. You don't need to talk about anything. Well, am I safe? Oh, yeah, of course you're safe. It was between two students, blah, 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 blah. Right. But I do think sometimes, like, it's on a need to know basis. I've heard that before, an administrator say that. And I'm like, what do you mean a need to know basis? I'm his teacher. Of course I need to know. I have the best relationship with them in the school, or you have the best, another teacher over here. How can I not help? Anyway. So one of the things I think that you talked about and I talked about just in that last little piece is don't put out the fire of parents, but encourage them to continually be involved. Even if they're coming in hot and heavy, I would much rather have a parent that comes in hot and heavy and frustrated with something than a parent that won't return the calls, won't return the emails, won't come in. And I'm not saying that that parent doesn't care, but at least I can work through something with a parent that is frustrated, angry, whatever. Yeah. I think that by doing that, it sends a message not only to that parents, but every parent has a community of parents that they talk to. We know that, like, oh, who should I get for this class? What third grade teacher is the best teacher? What, whatever. And I just feel like when you can get them involved in those things, it's easier to get them involved in other things like the PTSA, the school community council, on some committees, on
take that school-wide activities, the right direction.
Yeah. Like, hey, yeah, we'd love for you to be involved with the school. You want to volunteer? We need people on field trips. We need this and this and this. Yeah, please volunteer.
I agree. I think we should end it on that. That's a good note to end on. We've got more to talk about, and I think we're going to have like a part 2 later on.
Okay, part 2?
Oh, absolutely, part 2. But I think we should end it there because that just feels good. That feels right. Redirect that passion and that fire. Don't extinguish it. Is that how you said it? Don't extinguish it?
I didn't, but I'll take that.
Sure. Don't extinguish the passion. You just got to direct it the right way. You said something like that. It was smart. I'm going to have to rewind it and go listen.
I don't usually say smart things, so I'm glad it came out that way.
That's, I think, why I'm so surprised.
If you're listening to this podcast right now, we appreciate you.
Yes.
We assume that you're probably an educator. We hope that the things that we share and talk about help you. The best way that you can show support is by leaving reviews, comments, sharing with other educators that you know. You can also reach out to us. We're gathering names for guests right now. We're starting to kind of get a rotation of people to come on. We would love to talk. We'd love to talk with other passionate educators about what we do every day. So
hit us up.
Spencer Campbell.
I'm Stuart Hudnall. This is School Story. Peace.